thank you for signing on. My name is Alexander Traversa, and I'm a planner with the Jacksonville Transportation Authority. I just want to thank you all for taking the time out to join us for our U2C TOD pilot North Corridor meeting. This is the first in a series of public meetings focusing on each of the corridors surrounding the U2C TOD transit study. With us here today, I have Josh Turner, who is our lead urban designer with the WSP team, and Jimmy Kim, who is the principal and TOD practice leader at HRNA. So during today's public meeting, we ask that you share your thoughts on the public input page where you're streaming the video. There's a comment section on the right-hand side or below the video. We ask that you provide comments throughout the presentation in that. You also have the ability to text to call in. So the text line is 73224, and you can text the message JTA TOD, all one word, all lowercase, and you'll receive a message in response, and then you'll be able to submit any questions you may have, and these will show up in the chat as well. You can also alternatively email the address listed on the meeting page. So throughout the presentation, we ask that you just provide comments based on anything that we're talking about, and we'll have a post-presentation Q&A session where we'll kind of identify some of the common themes and answer as many questions as possible. What we're really trying to figure out is, this is a public meeting for our project. What we're here telling you is very important, but what's more important is your feedback. And so what we're really trying to gather from you is do we understand the characteristics of your neighborhood, and did we hit the kind of mark for potential for TOD? And then if you have any feedback or thoughts after the meeting, you can visit u2ctod.jtafla.com and take the survey. You can also submit questions and comments on the study website page, which I'll share later on in the presentation. So today I'll just give you kind of a refresher about the UTC program. We'll go a little bit into the study area overview and the project, the TOD pilot project, and then we'll have the team share some of their findings from the TOD assessment for the station areas. I'll share a little bit of information about the survey, and then we'll go into a Q&A and then share what our next steps are. So about the UTC program, so the program stemmed from kind of the need to improve accessibility in and around downtown. The goal was to create a high-frequency transit service that provides accessibility for the area in and around downtown and the connecting neighborhoods beyond that of the existing Skyway. We also wanted to make sure it was flexible and has the ability to change based on demand. And that really came into play when selecting a vehicle and kind of the whole program in itself. We wanted the ability to serve both in the elevated and at grade or street level. And so this all resulted from the Skyway Modernization Program. This was a study back in 2015 where the JTA board, as a result, decided that it was in the best interest of JTA and the city of Jacksonville to keep, modernize, and expand the Skyway. And some key objectives were kind of to address system deficiencies. The vehicles have met their useful life. A number of vehicles are no longer in operation, and it's become costly to maintain them. We're having to fabricate parts and figure out ways to make that system continue to run at the level it was. And then some of the feedback we got from the initial Skyway didn't reach enough places, and it didn't go as far into the neighborhoods or key attractions. So figuring out how we can expand that and improve the system, make those modal connections. And then finally, how we can help the city drive economic development and support its goals for kind of reinvigorating the downtown. As a result of the study, autonomous vehicle technology was selected as the best mode to meet these needs. It allowed the flexibility for operating at grade and at an elevated platform. And then as we move forward, we analyze this even further through a few FDOT and FTA studies. And we continue to refine the project further through planning. So the concept takes the 2.5-mile Skyway system and expands it to a system that is roughly 10 miles, extending into each of the neighborhoods off the termini of the existing Skyway. Again, connecting these neighborhoods to the urban core and downtown. And again, it's leveraging multiple public investments. So the UTC will make use of the new Jacksonville Regional Transportation Center, as well as a connection through Rosa Parks, which was our previous transit station. And then also supporting a lot of the city's investments in and around downtown. So what we're here to talk about today is transit-oriented development. And so those of you that aren't familiar with the concept, some people have been calling it transit supportive urbanism recently. It falls under smart growth. Really what it is a sustainable type of development that incorporates mixed uses in an area about a half mile or a 15-minute walk from a transit station. And this allows that area or that community to become a truly live, work, play area that you can function without the need of a personal automobile, and really puts an emphasis on transit as well as active modes of transportation, such as walking and bicycling. And we feel TOD fits, right along with JTA's mission. We're trying to improve mobility in and around the downtown and our communities surrounding it. We want to create economic opportunity. So, there's an economic benefit to TOD, and capturing that to further increase what we can do with transit is a big aspect of it. And then also enhancing the community and creating sustainable development patterns. Jacksonville has developed in a very unsustainable way with urban sprawl and expanding further and further out with the use of development on green spaces. And we just really want to utilize some of the underdeveloped assets that are in the core. And then again, that will help provide financial sustainability for both the JTA and the city of Jacksonville. So this project kicked off in January of 2020. We had the project team come into town. We have experts from across the nation. We did some site visits. We began a huge data collection effort and began planning kind of our public outreach and engagement process. From there, we've taken the data and we've begun doing some station area planning and selected 6 stations to advance into further refinement and more detailed station area planning. Now we're coming for our first round of public engagement. There'll be a few rounds of public engagement throughout the process where we'll be engaging stakeholders and shareholders to get their opinions and feedback on kind of what we are doing and kind of incorporating that into future planning. And then finally, we'll finish it up with an implementation report. And this is going to be kind of the steps that Jacksonville and JTA need to take to make this plan a reality. So like I said, there's more information on the project on our project website, which is at u2ctod.jtafla.com. On our website, you'll find out information about the project, some videos about TOD, and exactly kind of what the features are and some of the benefits of it. We go in depth for information about the corridors, and we'll continue to update this as we develop the content. And then you'll be able to engage with us, and that's really taking the survey and providing your feedback. And then some other resources or the ability to contact us or request meetings. So moving into the study area overview, before we jump into this, I just want to remind you that you can submit any comments in the comment section or text them in if you have anything related to any of the topics that we're discussing, and we'll address them at the end in the Q&A session. So to start off, we're going to do a deeper dive into the North Corridor. This is the Springfield neighborhood, and we identified 3 main stations as part of the previous studies surrounding the UTC. This came out of the Transit Concept and Alternatives Review on system expansion. So some of the key clusters from previous public engagement were around the 2nd and Main Station, the 8th and Main Station, which is where a lot of the Springfield development is already occurring, and then the UF Health and VA. So those are kind of our 3 stations that we'll be diving into. And then I'll turn it over to Jamie to take us through the real estate analysis.
Hi, thanks, Ann. Hi, my name is Jamie Kim, and I'm a principal at HR&A Advisors. We are real estate and economic development consultants. And I want to just briefly talk about the market study we conducted for this project. So our market study looked at the opportunity to add market rate multifamily residential uses within the system. And as you can see from this slide, the city added over 14,000 multifamily units. And so multifamily is just apartments from 2010 to 2019. You know, I'm sure as many of you know who live in this particular corridor, although the corridors overall accounted for over 11% of the increase, you know, our particular study area does not have that kind of development. And so part of this study is to look at the opportunity and what it might take to create multifamily development and TOD for the North Corridor. Next. And oops, if you can go back to the previous slide. Oops, the next. Oh, never mind. So we also looked at, what is driving jobs. And as folks, you all live in Jacksonville, you know that downtown is really a place, it's a 9-to-5 community where people work and then they head out. And what we're trying to do through this TOD effort is to build up the residential community in the area. So what we looked at was, what sorts of jobs exist. The corridors, house nearly 77,000 jobs, or about 15% of the jobs in the city as a whole. And employment did grow significantly in the mid-2010s. We've seen large financial and service companies expand. We've got some examples in the boxes below. Growth has slowed down a bit. It's expected to decline over the next decade, and that's going to sort of account we're going to take that into account as we think about, how much office space we can support. I also want to note, since we're all in the sort of virtual mode, our research was done pre-March before, COVID-19 lockdowns occurred. So all of this data has to be sort of tempered in this particular moment, and was considered, really sort of prior to this particular emergency we're in. Next. As part of our research, we also look at the types of developments that are recently that have recently come online in the North Corridor. So again, not a lot of activity, but we do want to recognize that there's been an apartment that's been constructed. It's modest, 14 units and 2 stories. It's rent restricted. And we also understand there is a new development in the works. Springfield Lofts is supposed to deliver 78 units and almost 10,000 square feet of new office space. So that's pretty exciting. But just development in general has been fairly slow and modest in this area. Next. And I think I hand it over to Josh now.
Great, thank you so much, Jamie. Yes, my name is Josh Turner, and I'm an urban designer with WSP. WSP is an infrastructure and engineering firm, but we also specialize in planning as it's associated with transportation initiatives. So JTA has brought us into this team to study the potential for TOD as it relates to the UTC and throughout the Jacksonville system area. So before, I want just to give you a little bit a lay of the land for this final segment of today's discussion, I want to first give some context to the overall system and talk about the categories of place that each one of these stations fall into. We also call them topologies. Then we'll get into how we assess or kind of rank the potential for TOD, and we've done it for all the stations. Today we'll talk about the 3 stations within the North Corridor with a special focus on 8th and Main and 2nd and Main. So with regards to, the type of place that our stations fall into, the topologies, working with the community and then also the DIA and JTA, we have 4 broad categories that the stations fall into. There's also opportunity to further refine the definition of each one of these places, and I'll speak to that in a second. But our 4 categories of places are urban center, regional center, core neighborhood, and special use. As you can imagine, urban center is really, really focused on the North Bank and South Bank, the central business district, so where you're going to have your office towers, the most employment concentration. Regional center is also a place of of employment focus. It could also be academic. So you can think of healthcare, you can think of a college, but these are outside of the urban core or the urban center. And we have a couple of those throughout the system. Core neighborhood really represents the neighborhoods that are adjacent to the urban core or the urban center. And 2 of our stations within the North Corridor certainly fall into that core neighborhood. And again, the core neighborhood definition, they're different throughout the system. Sometimes they're historic and urban like Springfield. Sometimes they're emerging neighborhoods like at Jefferson, where there's new multifamily apartment buildings that are popping up. Finally, we have special use, and literally they're unlike the others. They're usually destination, entertainment, places where people go to, and you can think of the sports complex with the stadium and the arena, and the emerging entertainment district that is going to be that is planned. Next slide. So to talk about specifically our stations within the North Corridor, so 2nd and Main and 8th and Main, they're a core neighborhood place. And again, I explained that these are adjacent to the central business district. They're primarily residential, and also they're less dense. And as we can see that throughout Springfield, you have a lot of single family homes. But one of the common characteristics of a core neighborhood, and in this case, a historic and an urban neighborhood, has that historic urban fabric that really is the organizing element for this area, and it differs from what we see out in the suburbs. But usually a common characteristic is that it has a single or 2 commercial corridors, which provide opportunities for people within the neighborhood to get some of their daily needs met. And so we see that in Springfield. We also see it in places like 5 Points. Next slide. And so this is just some of our images. To start off the project, we, as Alexander mentioned, we took a very thorough and deep tour of the entire system, documenting the existing conditions of all the neighborhoods. This is just some of the imagery that we're familiar with, really the rich commercial corridor of Springfield, really exciting and interesting stuff, a place that you'd like to be. Also has a nice character of the street trees. These are all different components that are already happening that are part of transit-oriented development that happen in these core neighborhoods. Next slide. So a station, our final station in the North Corridor is UF Health and also the VA. It's also the northern terminus of UTC. This is a different place than 8th and Main and 2nd and Main. We have categorized it a regional center because of its focus and concentration of healthcare services. That not only draws people in from both the region and locally, but then to utilize healthcare services, but then also it's a major employment center. And so we think that it makes a lot of sense for a station like UF Health to be considered a regional center here. Next slide. And this is just some of the images that we're familiar with, some of the buildings that are a little bit older. There's been some new construction in the area, but really, we see moving forward, the opportunities for this particular station area to remain an important place for employment and healthcare from here moving forward. Next slide. To talk about briefly just some connectivity, we've analyzed, how people get around and circulate, within the North Corridor. It's well served by bus. JTA has great service along 8th and Main Street. Those are also the two primary corridors within the North Corridor, with 8th Street providing important access to the UF Health area, and then of course Main Street providing that connection to downtown, and then also to neighborhoods north. But we do see there's an opportunity to improve the overall connectivity in the neighborhood from the perspective of bicyclists, pedestrians. And when we talk about TOD, those are the some of the ingredients that we include in our planning that really help to create that walkable, livable neighborhood. And the bones are already here in the North Corridor. We're very, like I said, we're very excited about what we see here, but it's definitely something that can be improved upon. And it's something that you would want because it also supports transit use. And it's something that Alexander said about, living in a neighborhood where you might not need a car if it's connected to transit. Next slide. So, for these specific stations, we have given a score or a ranking for what we think the potential for TOD is, and we've done this with 4 metrics. We look at this 4 ways. We take a look at each station, and we understand what's the local leadership, what's the support system for that particular station and neighborhood. We look at the market strength, which our friends at HRNA have been providing that foundational information to understand where's our starting point from a market perspective. And our work with providing a vision for TOD has to balance both the realities of the market, but also really what is the potential to have TOD provided the right conditions. Physical suitability is really about, is there property within the station area that could actually be developed for a new apartment building or a new commercial building? And that's both vacant parcels and also parcels that might have a building on it that's just underutilized. And then finally, plans in place. Within the neighborhood, what type of plans have been put forward to talk about, it could be a neighborhood master plan, it could be an idea about an open space network. So we look at these 4 things and we organize what we find, and we look at their strengths and opportunities, weaknesses and challenges. I'm not going to get into the detail of the matrix, but that's really how we try to bring this information forward so that the team and the community can really weigh in on what we're seeing. Next slide. So then we give each station a score. It's both, taking an objective perspective of what we're seeing from existing conditions, but then also putting on our planning and our urban design hats and just synthesizing and translating what we're seeing into something that's really approachable and easy to understand. So this is just a scorecard that we develop. With those 4 metrics you can see on the left: local leadership, market strength, physical suitability, plans in place. We rank those, you can think 1 to 4, or excellent, good, fair, and maybe not so good. And then ultimately we try to get at what is a station area's desire for transit-oriented development and how ready are they. And really that forms kind of, that's our starting point for when we go into planning out or creating the vision for TOD. Next slide. So across the system, as I said, we did this assessment for every station. The largest circle you see there, they rank the highest, and we have a couple of those throughout the system. And then mostly stations predominantly ranked somewhere in the middle range. Certainly 8th and Main and 2nd and Main are 2 stations that score good enough for us to say, okay, let's put forward some ideas for TOD, and here's some implementation strategies on how to make that a reality. Next slide. So I want to just take the last part of this portion of the presentation and talk about 2nd and Main and 8th and Main in more detail. We'll talk a little less about UF Health. We'll put most of our attention on these two stations. So the image on the right, that's a land use plan. The yellow indicates single family homes. You can see that within the station area, and that's a 1/4 mile offset from the station. The majority of the land use is residential. You can see the commercial uses along Main Street. And you can also see the darker color parcels, and those represent vacant parcels. And throughout the North Corridor, we do see quite a bit of vacancy, which could also become an opportunity when thinking about how to leverage transit and create a walkable neighborhood that's transit centric. Next slide, please. So 2nd and Main, as I said before, it has a good scoring. Where it didn't score so well was market strength, and we compared that to what was happening at 8th and Main, which I'll get to in a second, where there's the robust commercial corridor that could really be a catalyst or encourage new development to come online. But overall, we do think a station like 2nd and Main is certainly a good candidate to explore some transit-oriented development ideas. Next slide. So just just to summarize some of what we're seeing and why we scored 2nd and Main the way we did. 2nd and Main is a special place for a station. It's a transition between downtown and really the gateway and the entryway to the Springfield neighborhood. We do, as Jamie mentioned, the new development at Clutho Park. So that is happening within the station area, and that's a significant planned development. Next slide. So this image that you see on the right, this is really getting at what are the sites in the station area that could be where a new vision for transit-oriented development could occur. So there are quite a few vacant or underutilized property or parcels right around the station area. We think that creates an opportunity to create a cluster of context appropriate, really fits into the neighborhood, new townhomes, smaller apartment buildings, really clustered around the station, having ground floor uses that provide community needs, dry cleaners, coffee shops, and the like. But one thing that we do want to point out, and this is the same for 8th and Main, is that the property that could be available for transit-oriented development is in private ownership, and it's an important distinction because certainly privately owned property can be realized for transit-oriented development. But sometimes we find that if the property or parcels are publicly owned, either by the city or JTA or FDOT, that it's easier to get the momentum going and to make something happen on those parcels. Next slide. So for 8th and Main, very similar story in a way, in that the land use within the 8th and Main station is predominantly residential. You also see a lot of those dark parcels throughout the station area. So there are a lot of vacant parcels, but we do think that clustered around the 8th and Main intersection, that those are key parcels that a TOD vision should be put forward to really capitalize on the UTC coming into the neighborhood. Next slide. Oh, and I'm sorry, if you could go back to that previous slide. And again, I just want to reiterate that, what we see happening along Main Street, the commercial corridor, is really something that we think, should be leveraged. That commercial activity, the interesting shops and restaurants and bars, that's an attraction, and people want those types of things in their neighborhood. And so that's something that we think could encourage, new development that's a right fit for the neighborhood to occur around the station. Next slide. So we also think that 8th and Main scored well. Different from 2nd and Main, we think the market strength is stronger here. Again, just because of that commercial activity that's clustered on Main Street. Next slide. And then just some of our thoughts, kind of summarizing, how we're thinking about this station. The station does fall within the Springfield Historic District, so that's something to think about. Any plan that is put forward, we really would want the community, we would want essential stakeholders like SPAR to weigh in. And, the most important thing is that it's anything that is proposed or the vision is something that really you would feel like it's something that would belong in Springfield and not really take away from its existing character, but build upon it and further push the neighborhood forward. Next slide. And specifically, at this station, right adjacent to the station, and really right behind, just to the east of some of that commercial activity along Main Street, are a vacant, I believe it was at one time a grocery store. There's a significant assemblage of property that's just adjacent to the station that we're really excited to work with the community and stakeholders on about what that could be within the context of transit-oriented development. And as I said, the community and SPAR are really essential to make sure that we get that right. Next slide. And just to wrap up here, at UF Health, it did score lower than some of the other stations. The reason why, if you can go to the next slide, is that we think it's an existing employment center. We don't think there's a lot of easy opportunity for transit-oriented development to be realized. The large parcels that are there are surface level parking lots, and to do something else with those, you would need to make sure that you could still accommodate parking. But however, within the context or when thinking about the whole system, it's still a very important station, and it's great that there's that a station there for U2C, so that this area can continue to be well connected throughout the whole system. And with that, I'm going to hand this back to Alexander.
Thanks, Josh, and Jimmy, thank you for that in-depth dive of the North Corridor. So just again, I just wanted to reiterate that we'll be addressing the comments that we've received during this presentation in a Q&A session after the presentation. But I encourage you all to visit the project website at u2ctod.jtafla.com and take our survey. So at /survey, or you can use your smartphones to take a picture of the QR code on the right-hand side there. That'll take you directly to the website. And so the way the survey is broken down is there's just a general survey portion followed by a survey that's broken into each corridor. So you can participate in the corridor of your interest or all of the corridors to provide your comments on the project. So moving into the Q&A, it looked like there was a substantial number of comments regarding the vehicle choice. So I'll jump in first and go ahead and address that. Like I said, it was a result of the Skyway Modernization Program. The primary goal was to pick a vehicle or mode that was able to be flexible and utilize and leverage some of the existing Skyway infrastructure, as well as be able to operate at grade. So picking something that can address both of those needs was key in picking the automated vehicles. Second, the ability to kind of shift the way transit is being operated. So as a trend in the industry, we're seeing a lot of shift towards on-demand transit services. So automated vehicles have the ability to operate in a flexible way, similar to that of a flex route. So in the future, as automated vehicle technology improves, we'll be able to offer flexible services that could possibly be on demand as well as a fixed route service. Bringing that into the question is, so how do you get these developers to develop in an area where the transit service might not be as permanent as something like BRT or rail. Well, again, the smart city technology and vehicle communications infrastructure that needs to go into these corridors is a substantial investment, and it might not be a visible infrastructure. Some might call it an invisible infrastructure, where there's a ton of technology being invested in the corridor, which would then help support the drive for residential or commercial development in those areas. Again, so a flexible fleet, the AVs have the ability to meet the same demand as a larger scale bus, but remain flexible and nimble to provide more of an agile service. Vehicles can be platooned to hit higher demand areas, not physically linked like that of a train, but through technology, they'd be able to vehicle to vehicle communicate and then send a platoon of vehicles to higher demand needs in the network. So really the choice for AVs is just a lot of emerging technology in the industry, push from both the FTA and DOT on some of this technology, and kind of the flexibility of both the technology and utilizing our existing infrastructure. So hopefully that addressed some of those concerns. Josh, I have a few in here that I'd like to turn over to you. A few concerns about some of the residential development going in, some of the lofts at Springfield and their parking lots. So can you talk to kind of some of the strategies in TOD when it comes to parking and how we can help alleviate some of those issues in the area?
Yeah, sure. Thank you. Yeah, so usually, and there's different scales of approaches. So in an area like Springfield, that's lower density and primarily homes, you know, if we put forward the idea of smaller apartment buildings, you know, our strategy would be to make sure that the parking that is provided is something that's tucked behind the building, so it's not something that's part of the streetscape. I don't know in a neighborhood in the North Corridor with regards to parking garages, how feasible that might be to provide parking within those. If parking is provided in a parking garage, and you see it in a neighborhood like Brooklyn, you know, and also throughout other places in Jacksonville, the parking garage is usually wrapped with residential uses, and strategically through design and urban design, it really isn't something that comes across as the primary part of the building. But to get clarification, is the question about the lack of parking being provided, or too much parking being provided and taking away from the urban neighborhood character?
Great, thank you for that. So some other concerns. So about the kind of environment. So it looks like there's some environmental and cleanliness issues. Again, so JTA, at least from a standpoint of sustainability, we are looking into, so, you know, all of our bus stops have trash cans and are serviced regularly. The next step for that is at sort of our multimodal mobility hubs, BRT stops, we are exploring the opportunity to utilize big belly trash cans. So these are solar trash compactors and side by side with waste and recycling. That allows more waste to go into them, fewer services needed, and the ability for the technology to kind of let us know when we need to address those areas. A lot of that comes from, at least from my experience, is proper signage and communication to the community, as well as at the stops. So we are also looking at kind of pushing out a more robust sustainability and environmental kind of cleanliness campaign here for both internally at JTA and externally to some of our stop locations. So hopefully that addresses that concern. So I have a comment here. Love it to see 2 to 3 story mixed use buildings along Main Street. What do you think from our standpoint is kind of the feasibility of that, or if the concept, or even Jimmy, if there's potential for that or more?
Well, I'll jump in I'll jump in first, Jimmy. I'll say that that I think that's absolutely appropriate and really a nice scale for to fit in within the context of the Springfield neighborhood and along Main Street. Something that provides a transition from the adjacent single-family blocks to Main Street, where there's a little bit more activity. And even around Second and Main, I believe it's at Fourth or maybe Third. There's that new apartment building. I believe that's 3 stories, maybe up to 4. But from at least an urban design perspective, and wanting to add to the vitality and reinforce Main Street as a corridor, I think that's an excellent suggestion.
And if I can jump in from the sort of real estate standpoint, again, I echo your comments, Josh. We look at sort of comparable developments in the area, because obviously if the developers are building what's in demand, but also what is able to sort of pencil out financially. For example, we know that a high-rise building would not fit in sort of within the neighborhood context. And we know that, high-rise buildings just have, greater construction costs and therefore require, greater, much higher rents to support the development. So that would not be appropriate. So again, sounds like a pretty good suggestion.
Great, thanks guys. So still some concerns that I'll address here on kind of the mobility needs of the area and the vehicle choice. So one of the key concepts JTA is pursuing is what we're calling mobility hubs. And a key nature of any transit system is the support of multimodality. So the ability to connect existing BRT, local bus service, the AV or urban circulator networks, and even smaller circulators within neighborhoods are key aspects. So our ability to commingle these transit modes, even with infrastructure like sidewalks, bike lanes, through programs like Complete Streets, this all gives you the ability to center these on major nodes. And that's what will bring in kind of the developer interest, right? Because you'll have a population and employment there. You will have the infrastructure in place. You'll have multimodal nature. So it'll be a transfer hub and a destination, as well as the ability then to bring kind of the surrounding neighborhood together.
If I can just add to that and connect what you just said back to the parking question and just kind of overall strategies. The thing about TOD and the great thing about it, and especially because there's a mode of transit that plays a central role in these station areas, that the hope is that the overall burden of parking can be decreased, and through multimodal nodes and micromobility, and then U2C, and then just trying to create a compact, walkable, self-contained environment that all helps to change the conversation as much as possible about parking.
So I just have a few more comments about Pearl and 3rd and 2nd Street, about excessive parking concerns and major pedestrian travel to and from the city. So it looks like suffer illegal parking, street parking backed up down 3rd Street. So again, to Josh's points, if we can, bundle parking a little bit, provide other options as opposed to driving, this will help connect people to these neighborhoods where they won't need to drive their vehicle there. That'll help kind of alleviate some of that parking, as well as the pedestrian connection. So again, alongside all of this stuff for TOD development is that complete streets aspect. So improving infrastructure such as sidewalks and things of that nature will then, naturally occur in that quarter to half mile surrounding those nodes. So I have a question here about Cathedral District overlooked. Likely Cathedral District falls in closer to the Rosa Parks Transit Station, which we'll cover in another session, because I think it's within a half mile of that station. All right, so have you looked at how historic standards might impact TOD interest and design? Are there changes you might suggest to make it easier to develop while still maintaining neighborhood character? JTA is currently working with the city of Jacksonville on the comprehensive plan and their amendments. One of the changes in that was the changes of the language about TOD. It has been in there since about 2014 or 15, and it was never utilized. So the goal here was to improve that process, streamline how developers can make use of that, incentivize transit-oriented development, as well as kind of use a program that will help maintain community character as the kind of implementation mechanism. So likely the way it'll work, and again, we're only in the comprehensive plan stages, zoning code changes are here to come, but the changes will implement a kind of a master plan aspect. So we'll help maintain that community character while pushing development.
Yeah, and if I can just add that, even as we look at, for example, 8th and Main more closely and start to begin to develop a plan for that station area, it is something that's extremely important for the team to acknowledge and kind of get out in front of, and to be, and by that I mean just from the very beginning, be as try to fit in within that context, and also be aware of both the existing regulations as they pertain to kind of historic district standards, and then also if we're putting forward something that might break or move beyond that, or maybe modify, just to be very forward about it and get as much input and feedback as possible. And I think, again, it'll be great working with JTA and the development of the comp plan, being able to have those conversations fold into our approach, especially for a place like 8th and Main.
So I have a comment here. So it does not sound like you're involving the new multi-use housing businesses to contribute more to the infrastructure needs in the environment. Clutho is going to be crushed all 3 layers. So if I'm understanding that correctly, I assume you mean some of the loft developments that are occurring in the area. So from our standpoint, it comes down to kind of a public-private partnership when we do begin to implement these TODs. So it'll be kind of a give and take with developers as JTA kind of negotiates those developments in those areas. JTA has, as many of you might know, that JTA does contribute by designing and constructing roadways as far as infrastructure goes. We are coordinating as well with the Emerald Trail Plan, who will then be doing a lot of work in the area as far as the park space and trail network. And then the city has resources as well for the environmental concerns. Again, so from a sustainability standpoint, TOD actually has a great benefit on sustainability and the environment. The environment, social, and economic benefits all come from TOD. Again, reducing pollution through that mode shift to active modes, such as biking and walking. Complete streets have the ability to filter pollution out of the waterways through greenscapes and things of that nature. It also slows down the rate of runoff. So those are all kind of aspects that are incorporated into TODs that will help. And again, kind of as we develop these frameworks for implementing it, these will be some of the kind of requirements or things we will discuss with developers, or the community can discuss with developers to make sure that we're addressing the environmental needs of the areas. So Josh, I have a question here about kind of splitting up the nodes within the corridor. For Main Street being considered kind of a single TOD. Can you share some thoughts on that?
Yeah, I mean, you mean kind of...
So instead of having two separate stations,
yeah.
2 separate nodes of activity kind of forming into one node.
I feel like it makes a lot of sense, and we've actually thought about it that way in other parts of the system. If I can take you now to South Bank, and there's the Kings Avenue station and the new planned station to serve the district. It didn't make any sense to look at those and strategize a plan for TOD without really kind of combining them. And as we heard today, and when I was talking about both stations, there's so many similarities, and then also there's the strengths and weaknesses that are a little bit different, and to think of them both as a pair, I actually think makes a lot of sense. And I think it could I think it's a great suggestion. It's more than about this Main Street corridor that's anchored by two stations, and there can be an attitude about TOD that might be a little bit different at 8th and Main than at 2nd and Main, but nonetheless, you're still thinking about these things together. So I think actually it makes a lot of sense.
So we got another one. Have you looked at continuing into Durkeeville in the Northwest? Seems that would be important from an equity perspective. Yes, so this exact topic has come up in our previous study. So the Skyway Modernization Program came up with the existing kind of expansion plan. Again, this is a very high level planning exercise. So there is flexibility in expanding into different areas. One of the big aspects is playing off some existing transit services and things of that nature. So since then, we are kind of starting to consider a terminus off that way, just trying to figure out the best strategy for navigating the I-95 barrier from our existing termini of JRTC. It could possibly be an extension off another portion of the proposed existing extensions. But again, really high level planning so far on the extensions. So there's always an opportunity to expand into neighborhoods that need it.
It really speaks to the flexibility of a system like this, and really the benefits, even beyond a BRT, which is rather flexible. But really, I think that's one of the most exciting things about this system and the technology that's being talked about.
So Josh, another one about using UF Health and FSCJ for shared parking. Is there an opportunity to partner with some of the larger share of parking owners in the area, and what are some maybe implementation strategies, or is it working with them to kind of go vertical to then bundle some of the parking needs of the entire corridor, and then making better use of the transit and active modes?
Well, I think that's interesting, and I think you can think about it from a system or corridor perspective, and put forth a strategy that you just suggested, where it's almost it's kind of like a park and ride, people, but not, I mean, people would arrive there, and then that's their kind of entry point into the system from that point forward. Those a strategy that our team always has as a part of the toolkit for TOD is when we do see large fields of parking, that it does signal, is there a better use, a more sustainable, responsible use than that large surface parking lot? So then that's where the conversation of shared parking comes into play. UF Health is a rather built-up area, and what I would like to see would be, maybe one of those large surface area parking lots be redeveloped, and for there to be a shared parking structure. It can be, it can be a complex or a very strategic conversation, and how that actually gets done. But it's definitely something that, is a part of the toolkit, and, it's something that we put forward all the time. And we really put it in the context of, maybe this isn't in the next 5 years, but in 15 years, could this place be, an even more important and significant regional place? And what would need to happen for that to to come to fruition, and taking a second look at those parking lots and how the area can be built out, and shared parking is certainly one of those things that we would put out there.
So just to address some of the concerns about 95 not being a barrier, so what JTA is currently working on within the network is how do we bring the transit system from an elevated to an at-grade aspect. So through our transit concepts and alternative review on the expansion, we looked at a couple of different options, including vertical ramps or, ramps, vertical lifts for the vehicles, passenger transfers, things of that nature. So when I say a barrier, I really mean in the sense of how do you transition from a elevated to an at-grade option along those corridors, because we won't be able to build over 95. So again, an option might be a person transfer at JRTC. They might get off the AV and then go down and transfer to another one. So there's a few options there, but that's just what I mean by a barrier to that transition. And again, if you have any thoughts beyond this, please, go visit the project website, learn a bit more information on it from our About pages, and then feel free to fill out the survey and provide any further comments there. And they'll be incorporated into the planning exercise and study. It looks like we're slowing down a bit on comments. So I'm just gonna give a brief highlight of kind of what's to come and the next steps for the project. So again, this week, we're gonna continue our public outreach meetings. They're kind of being held in a per corridor basis because we're kind of diving into a lot of data here. And we like to kind of get into the nitty gritty about some of the actual things going on in your communities. So we'll continue that with the West, Downtown, East corridor meetings tonight at 7 o'clock, and then tomorrow follow up with a 5:30 on the South Bank at San Marco and 7 o'clock for the Southwest corridor. Again, the public survey is online. The link will be opened through, right now we're at the end of July, early August. So if you do have comments, please get them in and participate on the survey. As we continue to kind of refine the plan and incorporate some of these comments that we received from the public meetings into our plan and kind of shift the way that we're kind of addressing them, we'll begin to do kind of a second round of engagement, focusing on more of the station area frameworks for the selected stations. So this will be a more in-depth dive on what is actually feasible at these stations and what it may look like. And then as we move forward into the implementation, we'll design kind of that framework for implementing these strategies. Hang on, I'll bring the QR code back up for anybody that wants to visit the website through the QR code. And I just wanted to say one last time, thank you all for your participation tonight. This was I thought it was a really great meeting. One of our first kind of public virtual meetings. So thanks for hanging with us through some of the technical difficulties. If we didn't address your questions, feel free to email me or email the link on the public input page. That'll come directly to us, and we'll address comments that weren't addressed during the meeting with a bit more clarity, and we'd be happy to discuss that with you. But thank you for being a great audience and your participation, and I think it'll help really drive this plan. So I do see one other question rolled in about the capacity of the cars. So right now, JTA is running a test and learn program. The capacity of those vehicles is around 12 people. But again, we're looking at the ability for these cars to platoon. So being able to kind of pair multiple cars together, increasing that capacity of the kind of system in itself as opposed to just the individual vehicles. But I think right now the industry trend for transit AVs is about 12 passengers, similar to that of a Skyway train. Josh and Jimmy, do either one of you want to kind of tackle this? So still there's a lot of concern about utilizing a kind of a AV system for attracting developers. Is there any other systems that you may know of nationally that have proven that technology is a driver of investment?
Well, I might take the first part of this, that and then Jimmy certainly jump in here. But I will say the first part, that at least with our conversations in Jacksonville, meeting with local developers, talking with the development community, I was very happy to hear how the enthusiasm and how excited people are about, developers in particular, the development community, about this system because it's so different. And quite a few of our conversations definitely seen as a value add to for their development to be associated with this type of transit system, which is really kind of leading the nation at this scale. Jamie, I don't know if you want to echo
Yeah,
what
I mean, I think what's unique about the system is that it's really cutting edge. So there aren't really, there aren't a lot of comparables. But with that said, I think the excitement is the fact that the city and JTA are making an investment in transit in order to create, a really bustling, walkable, pedestrian friendly downtown area that, is a place where people will start to kind of migrate out of their cars, where it'll be easier to, walk or take the UTC to, do your shopping or, visit friends in the area. So I think that, it's an incremental step, but I think the excitement's already there. I think the commitment is there to kind of change downtown for the better, and make it a really attractive place for folks to want to live, work, and play.
Great point. Thank you both. And so I think with that, we'll wrap up. So again, thank you all for your participation. Feel free to jump on any of the future public meetings and provide great comments like you did here today. And again, just don't forget to participate on the online survey. Through the comments and the survey, we'll incorporate these into our plan and be on the lookout for another round of public engagement here in August. So thanks everybody, and we'll